Clydebuilt International is pleased to bring you another episode of Clydebuilt Conversations, discussions on leadership. Our special guest today is Ambassador Karin Olofsdotter. The ambassador is a noted expert in leadership and foreign affairs and diplomacy. She has held many senior positions of leadership in the Swedish Foreign Service. We spoke to her in Washington, D.C. Well, Ambassador, thank you very much for taking time with Clydebuilt Conversations today. We very much appreciate it.
Well, thank you for wanting to have me on.
For the audience, here we are sitting in the ambassador's office here in Washington, D.C., looking out over the Potomac River. And Ambassador, do you sometimes stand at the window, look out the window, and wonder, how did you end up here?
I do that all the time.
Yes.
First of all, of course, it's a fantastically beautiful location. So just that is something to wonder about, how Sweden got to have this piece of land and to build our embassy here. And of course, you're listening now, so you can't see it, but it's a building basically in glass, looking over the fantastic scenery of the Roosevelt Island and so on. So that in itself is something to reflect upon, of course, how beautiful it is. But yes, I do reflect quite a lot about me being Sweden's ambassador to the United States, because it wasn't really something I anticipated. I never anticipated being a diplomat at all. And as I didn't anticipate that, I couldn't really expect to be our ambassador to the United States. And I'm a career diplomat, so I've been working in the Foreign Service since 1994.
Yes.
But at the time when I was out of university, I thought I would work with foreign companies establishing themselves in Russia, and I would work with human resource questions, because I have studied psychology and so on. But there were no jobs in Sweden in 93, 94, because we had an economic crisis. But of course the government still advertised for jobs, and they advertised for the diplomatic training program. And a friend of mine, I thought, okay, let's apply. We will never get the job, but and here we are. I did get the job.
So if we back up a little bit and talk about your parents, they were small business owners, yes? Both of them were?
Yes, they come from very humble backgrounds. My father was born in 1930 and my mother in 1934. My mother's father had a flour mill in a small city with a river, so he could have a mill. And my paternal grandfather had a very, very, very small farm, like 2 horses and 3 cows and some pigs, and a little bit of forest. And my parents only went 6 years in school, because that was what was required in those days, in the 30s and 40s. And I think my mother would have really liked to go on to further schooling, but her brother got to do that, so she never did. But they were extremely industrious people, or are, and they're still alive. And they managed to, long story short, get into the shoe business. So my mother had one very exclusive shoe store in the town where I grew up, and I was actually one of Sweden's most exclusive shoe stores.
Interesting.
And I'm not saying that just to brag, but it really was. So even if it was in the southern parts of Sweden, she had customers, from Stockholm and Gothenburg who traveled there because of this shoe store. And my father had 2 shoe stores, but they were, everything from kids' shoes to old people's shoes and rain boots and what have you. And his brother had a shoe factory. So my father was the agent for the shoe factory, plus had his own 2 shoe stores. So I was brought up with people, or by people who always worked very hard and saw possibilities for themselves. And I think my mother in particular, she was a genius in marketing and sales and without schooling. And it shows that yes, schooling is very good, but you can also do a lot even if you don't have.
Right, she had natural instincts.
Yes, she did. Anyway, so and I'm an only child, so they of course saw me, or still see me, as kind of a miracle.
Yes.
And have always believed in me.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm here, actually, because I They really taught me how to work hard and so on, and that they taught me that I could do anything, which maybe I couldn't, but it helped that they saw it that way.
And so, as you know, we're talking about leadership as part of this series. You are a leader, but you've also been influenced by people on a personal and professional level. That point I thought was very important that you just made, that it's important for a leader to believe in the individuals that he or she is leading.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so as you were growing up in Sweden in the 60s and 70s, what was it like? How is it different, Sweden from the 60s and 70s, to what it is like now?
Well, of course, it's a totally different world, given that we have social media and so on. I was just talking to my kid the other day about that. I mean, we just, when you decided to meet someone, you had to trust that that person showed up at a certain place that you had decided, that you both could find it at that time. You couldn't change anything.
Very true.
You had to be there.
You're right. What did we do?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
We did meet up and we did do things, but
No
you couldn't change it. You couldn't call anyone. So I mean, life has of course changed.
Yes.
And I think the kids today, yes, we were aware of lots of things, but not as much as they are. It was a more innocent, at least I think in Sweden at the time, a more innocent upbringing. So it has changed, of course.
Did you have any, again, just growing up, outside of your parents, any inspirational leaders that you, either authors or artists or performers, that people that you...
Maybe that I didn't look upon as leaders, but I've always been a very curious person. And I, when I was 9 years old, my parents moved out to a place which now is residential, but then was a very summer house kind of place, so there were no other kids. So when I came home from school, TV started at 6 o'clock, so we couldn't start watching TV, and there was no internet or anything. So I read, and I think through reading I read about the world. My father subscribed to Reader's Digest of all things, and I think I have Reader's Digest to thank for me sitting here.
Yes.
And I didn't have anything else to do.
Yes.
So I read about Russia. I remember the books about I don't know what it's called in English, the Courier of the Tsar, the guy who rode over to Siberia and got his eyes burned out and all that. I still remember how that fascinated me and made me curious later on about Russia, because that was such a vivid memory from reading those stories.
Yes.
So I don't know if it's a person or so, and I never thought about myself as a leader kind of person. But I, like a lot of diplomats, I was president of the school club, but I never thought about that in concrete terms, I think.
And when you went to secondary school, so Kattegat secondary school?
Yeah, we have 9 years of elementary school and 3 years of gymnasium, which is voluntary, but everyone does it basically. So we go to school the same amount of time as American kids. So it's basically the end of high school.
I see.
And then we go on to university.
I see. Were there any individuals, teachers, or leaders through gymnasium or through the secondary school that you remember as pulling out qualities that you didn't feel were there, or anyone in the classroom or even athletically that had an influence on you?
I was a terrible athlete. I was like, when you had to pick a team, I was like the 3 leftovers that you got for one other person.
Don't pick me last. Don't pick me last.
Yeah, I was always last. I was always last. And no, it's funny. It's an interesting question, but I can't think of any. I had really good teachers, but I never thought about them as leaders in that sense, actually.
What did you find were the good qualities in the teachers that you liked? What
I mean, the ones that made you inspired and made you want to go there. I had some teachers which, actually, confession, I started skipping class my last semester because I had a biology teacher that I just couldn't go there.
Yes.
So I managed to get a pass even though I was absent half of the time. And that was, I have a real confession, that was the same time I was president of the school club. and I told her that I had so much to do there. I couldn't come to her class, but that was not true. Don't take this as an example if you're children and you listen to this.
I can relate to that. I did the same thing my senior year. It's we have to experience life and get out. And yes, so your big adventure when you left Sweden to come to the United States was around this period for the first time.
Yes, but my first my parents had always traveled quite a lot. We went to Spain when I was a child for winter vacation and so on. I went skiing in the Alps in Austria. So they had, even though they don't speak English, they were travelers. They traveled a lot. They managed to get by even without speaking. And but when I was 14, I got to go to a camp in Yugoslavia, in Sarajevo. This was in 1980. And that really, I think, brought out my curiosity in going abroad and living with other people. And my best friend and I, we went with 2 other boys from our town. It was four kids from this was an international, an international organization where you gather 4 kids from 10 different countries, and they spend a month together. And the idea is that if you get to know someone from another country, the risk of war is so much less. So, but at that time, this organization didn't exist in the communist bloc. So when the communist pioneer organization had international camps, they would invite it was a UN organization, invited back. So that's how I ended up with my best friend on a communist camp in Yugoslavia.
So these are intercultural dialogue type.
And that was so extraordinary, because I had never, of course, experienced anything behind the Iron Curtain or anyone in those areas. So for me, that was brought out a big curiosity about different parts of the world and people, and there were people from all over the world, or kids from all over the world.
And then so that was in 1980.
Yeah, and then we were actually, it was quite fashionable among my age group in the 80s to go as an exchange student to the United States. In a class of, we were 30 in my, that not years class as you have years, but group that I studied with, I think 10 went to the United States. So Sweden, of course, has been fairly wealthy for a long time, and we were typically middle-class kids, so our parents could afford to send us. And that was, first time I left home like that for a long time, and it was a tough year, but I learned so much, and particularly as I am an only child. All of a sudden, I came into families with kids, and I had to, make room for myself in that group and so on. So I learned so much about how to fight with other people, like normal people who have siblings are used to. But for me, that was a very, very strange and new experience. And very, in that sense, uncomfortable, because I had never had to argue with anyone.
Interesting. So your first experience with the U.S. was in New Jersey.
Yes, as an exchange student, a senior in high school.
And so 1980s.
1982, 83. 83, 84. 82, 83, sometime around
And
there.
Through that experience, and you mentioned Reader's Digest and certainly impressions that you had of the United States, movies and culture and music. What surprised you? What was different from your expectations you had, and then in reality, even though each place, as you know well, is different? I
think the kids there were less mature than children or people at the same. I was 17. The 17-year-olds in Sweden still today are much more free than American kids. They can go out. I mean, they are much free to do what they want. I mean, not bad things, of course, but they are less controlled, I think, than by their parents than children are here, or young people are here. So that was a bit of a shock, or different. And then also, this was. I felt, and I mean, very frank now, that they were so behind. when it came to fashion and everything. They asked me if I was a punk rocker. And I realized by that question, if they think I'm a punk rocker, they have never seen a punk rocker.
Were you a punk rocker?
No, I was absolutely not a punk rocker.
Yes.
But you know, in
I wish I
Sweden
could
at the
say I
time,
was a punk rocker.
girls my age, we didn't wear bras. And I came there and everyone had a bra, and I didn't shave my legs because we didn't do that. So, you know, it was just a very different I didn't think it would be so different than it actually was, because we are also at the same time very similar.
Right. Absolutely.
So I learned a lot.
Yeah.
And I mean, I really, the love for this country started there, of course.
Right. And then from there you came back to Sweden, and then university kicked in, University of Lund.
Yes.
Yes.
And then I went a semester to Moscow to study Russian. And then I got a scholarship to go to UCLA.
Okay. So lots of different experiences within that university. Just for audience members, University of Lund, of course, is one of the oldest Northern European universities and one of the great universities in the world. You ended up there on scholarship. You had wanted to attend there.
University is for free in Sweden, my dear.
Beg your pardon. So a scholarship in the sense that the government is there to support.
Paid by our taxes.
Yes.
It's very different in I think most European countries. You actually just apply with your final grades. You don't write essays. You don't go for interviews. You just apply, and if you have the grades enough, you get in.
Were there, I mentioned secondary school, teachers there when you were coming into universities that you remember that, were there classes that you really gravitated towards?
It was in a bit of I started out studying economics, which was really interesting, but it was stupid of me to start with that because it was actually too much of a shock. It was too difficult in a way as the first university class, but I really liked that subject. And then I was supposed to study, I had thought I would study political science, but it was if you had just passing grades, if you just, it's sort of complicated to explain, but if you build your own university degree, which I did, it was a lottery. So if you just had passed, then there was a lottery, and at the end of the 80s, everyone wanted to study political science. So I was like reserve number 982 or something. But I got into psychology instead. So then I started that. And then I thought I would do political science again. It was still a lottery. So I continued with psychology. So much in life, I think, is opportunities that just happen.
Sure.
And if I had been a political science major, I don't think I would be sitting here today. Because through having studied psychology, I was different. I got the scholarship then to go to the United States because we were only 2 people from the psychological faculty that applied. There were lots of people applying from the political science faculty. And I wouldn't have gotten it if I had applied from political science, but as I applied
Interesting.
Well,
that's a good lesson for students who may be listening, that there's no direct path.
No.
It's
that's
whatever
really
path
my experience.
you're passionate about.
Yes, passion and opportunities. And I think today's youth in that sense is different because given social media and how they can, and we all reflect ourselves in social media, they seem to more strive for some kind of perfect life that I'm not sure exists. But if you wait around for perfect to happen, you will wait. So I'm afraid that, I took that opportunity. So it was psychology. And then I was miserable in Lund. All my friends had boyfriends. I didn't have a boyfriend. I was a little bit interested in Russia, so I saw a course in Moscow. So I left for Moscow. That was just nothing planned, really. But I went, and thanks to that, I'm sitting here.
Right, that was a historic time. So that's late 80s.
No, that was 1990, January 1990. No food in Moscow.
Extraordinary.
Fall of Soviet Union in August, and so on.
Right.
And that's how my interest in Russian affairs started.
And for UCLA, is that the scholarship you're referring to?
Yes.
Yes, so you went to UCLA, sunny California, and you were there for how long?
A year.
A year.
So I went to the business school there for a year. Had the time of my life. And sad to say about Lund University, but I learned more in 1 year at UCLA than I did at 4 years in Lund.
Have you had a chance to go back and speak there? Or?
No, but I'm going to be interviewed by their alumni association soon.
Yes. And is it also true that you spent time in New Zealand?
Yes.
That you were a bartender there?
I was. So that was after, finished gymnasium, this high school kind of. I was so sick of studying, so and that was in the middle of the 80s when this kind of round the world tickets came out, the airlines, and you paid $1,000, and you could do 5 stops around the globe. So I went there. Thought I had a job, which I didn't, and ended up in a bar. And unfortunately, I haven't been back since then, and it's really a fantastic place.
Yes, and you probably are using some of those skills as well.
Oh, yes.
Yes. The bartender is definitely a psychologist.
Yeah, it is. It's a great job.
Just being very social. And so with Russia, again, that was such a formative time, and really just by chance that you ended up there at such a remarkable point in history.
Yeah.
Do you remember at that time leaders that you admired, or leaders not so much? Were there individuals, being in Moscow in that impressionable period, what individuals, either political, artistic, were standing out for you that you felt, oh, that's a voice in the midst of this challenge of someone that is inspiring?
It's a very difficult question to ask, because I kind of lived in a bubble. I went to the university, I studied Russian, I didn't have access to television or radio, and we listened to BBC World Service late at night. So I wasn't really, even though I lived in the middle of it, of course I saw the poverty at the time and the fact that there was basically no food. But to me, I wasn't aware enough to see that was leading to the end of the Soviet Empire. So it was just in the summer when I realized, and maybe that sounds very strange given that I lived in it, but given that we didn't have access to information the same way, and my Russian wasn't good enough to read the paper, and the teachers I had were, pro-Soviet Union. I mean, they were proud of their country and very sad. They were very sad to see the development then, and worried, of course, and so on. So in a way, it was like living in it, but not knowing about what I actually lived in.
Likely, is that the case with when we're in an historic moment? We don't necessarily know it's historic until many years later. When we
and I guess because also we didn't have access to information in the same way. So I wouldn't say that time were any leaders that I was particularly admiring, or no.
Right, and you had also, when you entered the Foreign Service, you went back there outside of being a student. You went back to serve on assignment in the Foreign Service right away.
Yes, so after 1 year I got, I really wanted to go to Russia because I love Russia, and I realized if I wouldn't go early on, I would lose my language skills. So I was extremely happy to go there, and there I had a leader who I learned a lot from, the ambassador I had at the time, a very strict man, one of our great ambassadors, also in some ways a controversial person, because he's always like sticking his neck out and very vocal about his views. But from him I really learned how to run an embassy. And of course at that time I didn't picture myself running such a big embassy and so on, but the way that you always have to have the budget and the processes, all that has to be really in order, and you have to be meticulous, and how you lead a conversation and how you negotiate and so on. So I really learned a lot from him.
It's not necessarily for the Foreign Service, whichever country it may be, it's not necessarily only about the policies, it's more the apparatus and understanding how to run and manage activities.
So I think the job as an ambassador has many. One is being the representative of your country, the other one is being manager, which is two totally different things. So and of course I think diplomacy is a job that you really learn through long many years. It's not you when you're hired as a diplomat, you are not a diplomat, because it's really like most skills, you really have to learn it over time. It's with experience, and I feel now, having almost worked 26 years as a diplomat, I feel I've been in so many different situations that I can use the whole portfolio of my experiences when I look at the challenge we have.
Yes.
So who should I contact? What kind of work should I do to get our policy through, and so on. So, and I was really lucky to have that man as my first boss.
Yes, and you also had the real test of management as the chief of staff in the foreign ministry for 3 successive foreign ministers.
5.
Five, that's
but one was only 5 days.
Oh, 5 days, okay, so technically, yeah. So that's extraordinary.
Yeah, and I've been part of the management team at the ministry as well.
Of the foreign ministers in that mix, don't necessarily have to list all 5, but were there individuals that stood out for you that really...
Well, in a sense, they kind of all stood out, because I don't think you become a minister or a secretary, as you call it here, if you don't... it is politicians. And politicians, I know why I am a civil servant and I'm not a politician. I admire politicians greatly, but that's not for me. I learned a lot working so closely with them, and very, very different ones. And they all had different styles. The first one, she had been our former Minister of Justice. So she took her standpoint in foreign policy in international law. And that carries very far, especially if you're a small country like mine, where we really stress the international law and rule-based world order and so on. Because as we are small, we are in the hands of the superpowers, and if there's no law, what do we do?
Yes.
And she took that standpoint in when she looked at foreign policy. So that was a very learning experience. And then another one, he was extremely into foreign policy and had a network in the world that few leaders in Sweden has had. So that was interesting to see how he worked his network to get things done. And another third one was also a very extremely good people skills person. So he got leaders to say things that they probably didn't think that they would say.
Interesting.
But they were so enthralled with him and his personality. So I learned a lot. They were very different, but I really learned a lot about style and how you can address a problem and what's important for politicians. And I really that's very useful for me as a civil servant and running an embassy, and so thinking about what do we actually need to do and what don't we need to do.
Right.
So that has really helped me a lot, I guess, as a leader.
Yes.
Because I think, maybe I'm not prioritizing is always difficult, but as I kind of know and understand how politicians think, I think it's a bit easy, not as difficult maybe.
You had spent also time at the EU. You're an expert on EU matters, and at the Swedish mission there, and I had spent time here as the DCM prior to coming here as ambassador, and so you've just had so much experience. It's difficult to isolate specific events, but I see sort of threads of similarities with all these different experiences you've had. Do you feel that there is, when we talk about leadership, are kindness and charity qualities of a good leader? As you've interacted with leaders, have you been a leader, kindness and charity?
Yes, absolutely. And I don't have like my management philosophy or leadership philosophy is I want to be the leader that I would like to have myself. I don't like leaders who micromanage. I want to have a leader that trusts me, unless it's proven that I cannot be trusted. And most people can, of course, be trusted in the workplace, and you get so much more out of people if you let them be and let them do their job the way they want to do their job. And you easily see if someone is not doing their job, so it's not a difficult thing. So I think yes, I think I am a very kind person, but of course when I get angry I get extremely upset. And it happens very rarely, because I do put trust in people, and when I get extremely upset, it is when that trust has been abused. And that I absolutely have no tolerance for, and then I am very tough. So I think most people see me as a very kind and outgoing person, and they get very surprised when they see my other side, which is then very tough. But it happens very rarely.
Yes. I like your characterization, though, your description of how you would like to be seen, and then how you would like to be treated, and applying that. And
I think I mean, people are different, but I really try to be the boss I would like to be. I would like to have myself if I had one.
Yes. There's a great.
So it doesn't make it so difficult. Of course, it is difficult to be a leader and boss, and I mean, you have to make sure everyone likes their work. I mean, everyone can't like the workplace all the time, but in general, people should like to come to work.
Yes.
Because otherwise, they won't produce.
Yes.
And we spend, most of our waking hours together with our colleagues and not our family. So it must be a place where people want to be.
Yes. In our remaining moments here, advice for younger people. You've had all these experiences and have many experiences to come, but as you think about, again, as we were reflecting, looking out the window, and how you arrived here, how did that happen? What would you say to younger people who may be facing discouragement or stress, or just wondering what they're doing, what their direction is, what their path is?
Yeah, of course it's easy to say once you sit here, but I think it's, as I said earlier, when there is an opportunity that arises, if it doesn't kill you, do it. No, but maybe it will be something that changes your life into a direction that you had never thought about. And if you like it and enjoy whatever it is your experiences, then you will probably be good at that. So even if it's the path that you hadn't thought originally, probably will give you a chance that you would never ever had otherwise, and that's what you will remember in life. So I think a lot of things is about opportunities that comes by. Of course, be well prepared. If one studies or whatever makes oneself better in many ways, it's easier to jump on those opportunities, of course. But also, it's important to understand that, and I think you are very good at that in America, that failure is actually not bad. I mean, of course, it's not good in the moment, but usually it gives you another opportunity. And in my country, I think we are failure is seen much more as giving really bad consequences and so on. It's we avoid failure in a different way, and I think this makes us a little bit too cautious. And I think Americans are much better at that. So failing is not always negative. Failing can also lead to something completely different and new. So I know a lot of young people are very stressed about, it's harder to get into universities and you have to be so versatile and all that. And I just wish and hope that they didn't stress so much. It will be okay. You will find something that you really like. But it can be something that you never thought about, like me. I never ever thought about being a diplomat. It didn't occur to me. And I think that's one of the reasons why I am where I am. You
didn't pursue it. You just pursued your passions and your interests.
Yeah, and it happened.
And then it happened.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador, and thank you to your wonderful embassy staff
here
as well.
Thank you, and thank you for being interested.
Yes, appreciate your time and insights. Thank you for listening to Clydebuilt Conversations from Clydebuilt International. Until next time, take care.